you ever wondered, like, what really sets apart those heroes we always hear about from, like, everyday people? You know what I mean? Today, we're going to dive deep into the life of Colonel Paris Davis, and I think his story really gets at that question.
Yeah, and what's really interesting about Colonel Davis's story is it kind of goes beyond just typical battlefield bravery, you know? It's got these deeper themes like resilience and leadership, and it even gets into how complicated it can be to recognize and honor true heroes.
Oh, absolutely. We're going to take you through his whole life. We'll start with his early days, then get into his incredible actions in Vietnam, and we'll even talk about the decades he had to wait to receive his well-deserved Medal of Honor.
It's really a story that tells you a lot about a person's character, and not just in the heat of battle, but the choices they make all throughout their life.
Okay, so let's rewind back to the beginning. Colonel Davis was born back in 1939 in Cleveland, Ohio. And even as a young man, you can kind of see those early signs of what would shape his path.
He had this drive, this powerful drive in two areas that you wouldn't think would necessarily go together, the military and sports. But he managed to do both. At Southern University, he studied political science while also being in the ROTC program. So you see right there that commitment to academics and to service was there early on.
It's funny how often you see that, athletics and the military, like they both need that discipline, teamwork, pushing your limits.
Exactly. And don't forget the historical context here. He becomes one of the first African-American Special Forces officers during the Civil Rights Movement. Yeah. That takes so much courage to break those barriers within an elite military unit during such a turbulent time.
It's like he was battling on two fronts, right? Challenging those social norms and also preparing for the very real battles he'd face in his military career.
And he didn't just become a Special Forces officer, he thrived. After he was commissioned in 1959, he went through airborne and ranger schools and was then selected for the 7th Special Forces Group. Then he had deployments to Korea and Vietnam. This guy was always on the move.
You can really feel that drive, that ambition. He wanted to constantly challenge himself and reach new heights. But it's his second tour in Vietnam in 1965 where things get really dramatic.
Yeah, that's when the Battle of Bang Son happened, a 19-hour battle on June 17th and 18th. And this battle really becomes central to his whole legacy.
This wasn't just some small fight either. He was leading a company of South Vietnamese soldiers who were pretty inexperienced, plus 3 other Special Forces personnel. And they were going up against an enemy force that was way bigger and had more firepower.
It's really important to remember the odds they were facing here to truly understand what Colonel Davis was able to pull off. He wasn't just fighting to survive, he was leading a group of men in a really terrible situation. Can you imagine the pressure and responsibility on his shoulders?
The details of this battle are wild. He led charges, got into hand-to-hand combat, and even called in artillery fire, all while being wounded multiple times. Sounds like something straight out of a movie.
But what really makes Colonel Davis stand out is his dedication to his men. At one point, 3 American soldiers were pinned down by really heavy enemy fire. Robert Brown, John Reinberg, and Billy Waugh. And Davis, even with his own injuries, went back again and again to rescue every single one of them.
Wow. That right there shows incredible bravery. But there's another detail that really shows his character. He refused medical evacuation until every one of his men was safe. He put their lives before his own. He truly embodied what selflessness and leadership are all about.
That decision says so much about him. He wasn't just trying to win the battle. He was dedicated to making sure each one of his men made it out alive. And that's where leadership goes beyond just tactics and becomes about compassion and real courage.
It's hard to even imagine that level of courage until you hear a story like Colonel Davis's. So after this incredible display of heroism, you'd think he'd be recognized immediately, right?
Well, that's where the story takes a bit of a turn. Despite recommendations and testimonies, he wasn't given the Medal of Honor, which is the highest military decoration for valor for decades. It's really a complicated part of his story.
It's hard to believe something like that could happen, especially for actions as amazing as his. But even without that specific recognition, he did receive other medals for his service in Vietnam.
Yeah, he got the Silver Star, which is given for gallantry in action against the enemy, and the Bronze Star, which is for heroic or meritorious achievement, and the Purple Heart, which is given to those wounded or killed in action. He even got the Air Medal, which is for meritorious achievement while flying. All these medals show a soldier who is constantly performing at an incredibly high level, showing bravery and skill.
And there's another medal that really stands out. The Soldier's Medal. This one isn't for actions in combat. It's for heroism outside of a direct combat situation. It's really rare for someone to receive both the Soldier's Medal and the Medal of Honor.
That's because it takes a really special kind of courage to act heroically, both in the heat of battle and in everyday life.
It's wild to think about. You've got this soldier, right? This guy who showed so much courage on and off the battlefield. He earned all these medals. But that top honor, the Medal of Honor, that one stayed out of reach. It really makes you wonder why there was such a long delay.
I know, right? And there isn't really a clear answer, which just adds to the mystery of his story. There's no official reason given for why the process stalled. But by looking at the history and what people who were there have said, we can kind of piece together some possible reasons.
Well, he was one of the first black special forces officers during a time when racial tensions were really high in the U.S. You can't ignore that. Could that have been a factor?
Yeah, it's a good question. Systemic racism was a huge problem in a lot of places back then, that's for sure. But gotta be honest, there's nothing solid that directly links racial bias to the delay.
It's definitely complicated. There are no easy answers.
And there are also accounts of lost paperwork and like all the red tape. Remember, this was way before digital records and easy communication.
Oh yeah, I can see how things could get lost or forgotten, especially with all the chaos going on during a war.
Exactly. Think about trying to track down witnesses and gather evidence years later. People move, memories get fuzzy, important details get lost. It's tough.
It's like a detective story almost, trying to put all the pieces together.
But here's where the story takes a turn for the better. Colonel Davis had people who believed in him, and they never gave up trying to get him the recognition he deserved. Other soldiers, lawmakers, even people in the community, they all came together. They got evidence, pushed for his case to be looked at again. It's a pretty great example of persistence.
And that belief in fighting for what's right, even when it seems impossible.
Totally. And it worked. In March of 2023, President Biden finally presented Colonel Paris Davis with the Medal of Honor in this really moving ceremony. It was a huge moment, like decades of waiting. And finally, his incredible bravery and sacrifice was recognized.
I can't even imagine what that must have felt like for him and everyone who'd fought so hard, like all those years. And then finally, justice.
President Biden actually summed it up really well during the ceremony. He said, nearly 20 hours later, after that bugle first rang, Captain Davis had saved each one of his fellow Americans, every single one. It just hits you how big of a deal his actions were and what an impact he had on everyone he served with.
It's also inspiring that his story didn't end with his military service. He kept on serving his community in different ways.
Right. Like after retiring from the Army in 1985, he didn't just kick back and relax. He went and got a master's degree in public affairs from Southern Illinois University and then a PhD in public administration from Northern Virginia University.
It's amazing that after everything he went through, he still wanted to learn and give back to society. That shows some serious resilience and belief in always learning new things.
I know, it really makes you think about what being a hero actually means. It's not just about one big act or a certain time period, it's a way of life. It's about serving others and trying to make things better.
Colonel Davis is a perfect example of that. And then he went on to publish the Metro Herald newspaper in Alexandria, Virginia, which focused on community issues and civil rights.
Think about that. He went through the horrors of war and faced so many setbacks, but he chose to give a platform to others, especially people who are often overlooked. It's really something.
It really shows his dedication to equality and building a better society for everyone.
And that's what makes his story so powerful. It's not just about being brave in battle. It's about the choices we make each day to live a life with purpose.
His life is full of these incredible achievements and inspiring acts. It's really amazing.
Yeah. Besides the Medal of Honor, he was inducted into the Ranger Hall of Fame in 2019, and his name's engraved at the National Museum of the U.S. Army. So his story's going to keep inspiring people for years to come. But even more than those awards, it's the values he lived by, the courage, perseverance, and his dedication to serving others that's really impactful.
It's one thing to hear about all these amazing acts of courage and leadership, but it hits different when you hear it straight from the people who were there.
You're right, those first-hand accounts from the guys who served with Colonel Davis, they give you this real insight into who he was as a person and how his leadership affected everyone around him.
Like take Master Sergeant Billy Waugh, one of the soldiers Davis rescued during that crazy battle of Bong Sun. He said later that Davis was the bravest man I've ever known. That's got to mean something coming from a guy who was right there with him through it all.
And it goes beyond just being physically brave. A lot of people talk about how calm he stayed, even under pressure. Like even when everything was going crazy, he was still strategic, calm, and totally focused on making sure his men were okay.
It's that ability to make others feel confident, even in the worst situations. That's what makes a great leader. Makes you wonder if that unwavering strength came from his background in sports.
That's a cool connection. Both sports and combat need that mental toughness, discipline and the ability to perform under pressure. It wouldn't be surprising if his athletic experience helped shape the way he led.
So when you look at Colonel Davis's whole life, there's this clear pattern of service. He was always dedicated to using his skills to help others, on the battlefield, in the community, and even through his newspaper.
That Metro Herald work is really something else. He didn't just report the news, he used his platform to talk about social injustices and push for change. He really fought for civil rights and gave a voice to people who were often ignored.
It shows us that heroism isn't just these big moments or huge actions. It's also about the choices we make every day to do the right thing and work towards a fair and just society.
And maybe that's Colonel Paris Davis's biggest legacy. It's not just about his medals or his accomplishments. It's about courage, integrity, never giving up, and a lifelong commitment to making a difference.
His story really shows you the power of the human spirit, and it's inspiring for all of us. It reminds you that real heroes come in all shapes and sizes, and we all have the potential to do great things.
As we wrap up this deep dive into Colonel Davis's life, what sticks out to you? What parts of his character and his actions inspire you? And how can we all learn from his story and use it in our own lives?
I hope this deep dive gave you a better understanding of what makes a hero and how everyday people can do amazing things if they have courage, determination, and that spirit of service.
Don't forget, true heroism isn't about awards or getting recognized. It's about living a life with a purpose and really wanting to make the world better.
And sometimes, like with Colonel Davis, that journey might have unexpected twists and turns or setbacks where you have to wait a long time to see results. But his story shows us that if you keep going and stay dedicated, you can get justice and achieve great things.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you found it interesting and inspiring. And until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep looking for those stories that show the very best of humanity.